ladders may well be the most suitable means of undertaking the activity, the work at height activity, but it shouldn't automatically be your first choice. If it's right to use a ladder, select the right ladder and get trained to use it safely. That's the main message.
Welcome back to part 2 of HSS Training's In Conversation With series, and after the great success of our first podcast, we welcome back our esteemed guest, Peter Bennett OBE. In part 1, we learned about Peter's incredible dedication to working at height safety. Now, let's delve deeper. Today, we'll focus on Peter's role as the Executive Director of the Ladder Association. Under Peter's leadership, the association is making great strides towards normalising the correct use of ladders in the workplace. We'll explore their initiatives and the impact they're having. For those who haven't listened to part 1 yet, it wouldn't hurt to go back and hear about Peter's overall passion for height safety. Now, let's jump back into conversation with Peter Bennett. So Peter, welcome back to the studio for part 2 of our conversation with HSS Training. I really enjoyed our conversation around PASMA and I learned a huge amount around the topic and the fantastic work that you're doing. And I, if the audience out there hasn't seen it, go back and watch part 1 to learn more about you. But today we're going to be talking about the Ladder Association. So I imagine it's a largely, similar sort of story, lots of improvements to have within the industry, but, let's dive into it. Let's talk about the Ladder Association. So if you don't mind, just give us a brief kind of outline of your role in it and, and what it is and, what it's there for. Okay,
thank you very much. Thanks to you again and to HSS for inviting me along here today. I do appreciate it. Ladder Association is a not-for-profit organisation, lead industry body in the sector of ladders and step ladders. Unlike some of the other organisations, it does what it says in the tin. The Ladder Association kind of gives it away, no acronyms. It has been going for quite some time, formed in 1947, had their 75th anniversary last year, so they've been about for a while. The whole purpose and the whole function of Ladder Association to promote the safe use of ladders and step ladders, and my role in that is as Executive Director, basically directing and pushing in the implementation of policy and such like.
Okay, great stuff. So let's dive straight into it then. I think one of the things that you mentioned before the conversation we had is the common misperception that, a ladder's a ladder, let's crack on and get it done, but let's frame the need for education and process and, I guess, legislation around the use of ladders and how that's changed over the years. Sure. What's your role in that?
I mean, I think in simple terms, most people when they look at a ladder think that's a simple piece of equipment. Why would you possibly need to be trained in it? You just lean it against the wall and do what you got to do. The simple fact of the matter is that ladders probably account for more falls and more fatalities and serious injuries than any other kind of work at height equipment. The work at height regulations makes no distinction. They essentially say if you're working at height, you need to be competent to do so, and it does not say except for ladders. So I've mentioned in previous occasions that competence is generally defined as a combination of training, technical knowledge and experience, and that competence also relates to the use of ladders and step ladders. And it's really important that people understand that. And that's in part of what the Ladder Association training scheme is about, is to try and get that message across. And hopefully we're doing that. Well, we're doing it. We're making really pretty good progress in comparison to previous years.
Okay, great. I think that actually, the topic of ladders is probably quite personal to me, actually. So, like 2 years ago, I sort of was involved in my father having an accident with ladders. And I remember very, very clearly the clack of aluminium ladders and silence after it, and kind of having to spend 7 hours to keep my father alive, essentially. So, I know how important it is. It's like it was a 3 meter fall. It was probably seen as nothing to danger, but it can be life-changing to that person and the ones around it. So, I imagine it's quite an emotive kind of, industry to work in and kind of making sure that these things don't happen, not only in the workplace, but how do you, does the work that you do is purely workplace or is it hobbyists as well?
It's primarily workplace, but we are increasingly aware of mean, certainly ladders and step ladders, they straddle from workplace into the domestic environment.
Yes.
And we have some numbers, not particularly reliable numbers, but we have some numbers in respect of the number of incidents involving ladders in the workplace environment. However, I am reliably informed by people that would know about these things, certainly colleagues at ROSPA, the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents, that from their research, they reckon that if you could take the statistics related to workplace incidents, you could apply a multiplier of 30 to that to give you the kind of numbers that you'd be talking about in the domestic environment.
Right.
The real difficulty there, though, is that the domestic environment is very, very difficult to get to. However, you know, we're increasingly aware of the fact that is something that we do need to get to, because that kind of again straddles. Well, we would think of it, you know, the domestic environment also kind of takes you into white van man, one man business, micro businesses. They kind of get mixed up on the domestic, between the two, the domestic and the commercial environment. Yeah. So, I mean, as you've explained that there to me, your story is not unusual. I'm sorry to say, and we would really be interested to talk to you a little bit more about that, because we're really trying to get the human stories behind the statistics. And even, you know, as you're saying there, I've heard a couple of times, in fact, I've heard quite a few times of people who've been in a similar situation. And I think it's important to say that the No Falls Foundation has a survey, a study being undertaken just now, aimed just to people like you. Tell us your story. Doesn't need to be you that's been involved in the fall from height. We're trying to gather together not only the numbers, because we don't have the real numbers, but we're trying to gather the stories behind those numbers, the human stories behind those numbers.
Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it? And that's, I think, the emotions of real stories does, well, hopefully break the barriers of change behaviours and somewhat. But I assume that there's been real change in legislation as well. Let's go take a right step back then in terms of what is deemed, you know, dangerous in terms of working at height. You know, I think we said off camera a while ago, you know, the change to, you know, anything below 2 meters, no one really didn't bat an eyelid. It's not nothing to do with us. But as you say, that's quite rightly changed. So what did the landscape look like originally? You know, what changes have been put in place over the years?
I think in respect of ladders, probably the biggest change that would be discernible is that not so long ago, it would have been quite easy for you to get a ladder that's a 3-section ladder, 24 foot per section, that would get you up to like 60 feet. Those ladders are no longer available. Nobody would even think of that as being, that's a suitable means of getting up to that kind of height. What you will find, or what you're seeing more of, is that ladders, and the ladders that you're able to buy and that people are actually wanting to buy, are getting smaller and smaller. And that kind of relates to some of the other legislative requirements as well, which are essentially saying, if you're going to be working at height, you need to make sure that you select the correct method of working at height. And again, I think we've had a discussion previously where we've been saying, from the Ladder Association point of view, our messaging has changed subtly over the years, and our current messaging is, look, sometimes a ladder is the right equipment for a job, but it's not, and it should not always automatically be your first choice. If a ladder is the right choice, choose the right ladder and get trained to use it safely.
Good. So I guess that you're saying there, in terms of, if it's the right choice because it minimises time, and if minimising time also minimises risk.
I think we're certainly very clear, as our colleagues in HSE, look, the factors that will determine whether it's okay and whether it's a good choice is if it's low risk and short duration. Low risk first, and then short duration. One of the things we were talking about previously is, for instance, in this studio where we are just now, if you wanted to change one of those light bulbs, easiest thing for you to do is bring in a set of step ladders, go up there, change a light bulb, and it's done and dusted in a couple of minutes. That there is low risk and short duration, and that's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, good. Okay, so in terms of training then, what is it you're looking to achieve with the different sections? I think that we identified in part one that it's important to look at all sections within the workforce. So, you know, sort of managers, people on site, people using, I guess that you're missing the build process, but the direct user and those around using ladders. So just talk me through the different types of training that you offer, while you kind of, you know, make sure that is offered like the likes of HSS Training.
Okay. So again, as you would expect, the most common one and the most popular one is ladders for users, and that's what it says in tin as well. People who are using ladders, people who are using ladders on a regular basis, what that teaches you, what it educates you is when it's right to use a ladder, and what are the factors you need to take into account. But equally importantly, when it's not right to use a ladder, and when you need to say, well, in actual fact, there's a better way of doing that, and I should be using another method of getting to work at height. There's also inspection part of it. So you can do a ladder users inspectors course, which covers the use of the ladders and then inspecting the ladders to make sure they're still in good condition and that everything is as it should be. And again, in common with other work at height methods, there is a ladders for managers, which again is to do with if you're managing the work at height activities of others and they're using ladders, you need to know what good looks like. You need to know when you need to intervene. You need to know when you need to tell people to stop working because what they're doing is not safe. And the only way you'll know that is if you get trained.
Yeah. Good. I guess that we talked about towers previously. It's a bigger project to put one up, install one, and use it, and therefore you've got more chances to stop and think about what you're doing. I guess the use of ladders in the workplace is momentarily, I'll chuck the ladders up, I'll get there. It's all very, very quick and done and dusted, isn't it?
I think, to be honest, it is one of the big concerns that lots of organisations send their pods out, send their workers out, and they've got a van, and in that van or on the roof rack of that van, they've got 2 ladders or 3 ladders, and the general principle is when you get to site, one of those ladders will do it. And that is a concern. The concern is the only choice they've got is one of these 3 ladders. And if that's not right, then that's where the difficulties come in. But what you essentially are finding is that everything turns out to basically be done by these 3 ladders that they have on the roof. And we know fine well that quite often that would not be, if you had the choice of everything, quite often that might not be the case. Quite often you would want to go and look at something else, either maybe even a bigger ladder or another piece of work at height equipment that might be more suitable. Saying that, look, the fact of the matter is there are millions of ladders being used. We reckon by our estimates maybe 2 million ladders in use.
Nice.
And we reckon that maybe something in the order of 10 million ladder uses per year in work environment. So they're being used and used extensively. What we obviously want to make sure of is that where they are used, they're used safely and that cognises the taking of the conditions in which they're being used. And as we say before, equally importantly, that you have an option to say, that's not right, I need to use something else.
It's interesting where you kind of, doesn't matter how far back you look, you sort of picture a tradesperson in movies or culture or whatever it is, they've got a ladder over their shoulder, won't they, at some point, it's just part and parcel of the toolbox. So how do you ensure that you take something that's so fundamentally basic part of the toolbox and bring it into the future and bring technology into it, perhaps, in terms of the use of a ladder?
So there's maybe a couple of things I'll bring to this. The first one is that fairly recently, not that long ago actually, a little bit longer ago than you'd expect, the European standard for ladders was revised. It's been painful for a few people because what the revised standard required, amongst other things, is that ladders above a certain height are required to have an extended base, so the base has got to be wider. And when I think about it, certainly when I look at it, I think that's a pretty sensible thing. If it's gone higher, make it wider, and then it's less likely to fall over, which is obviously something that's desirable. But that has meant for not just UK manufacturers, but for European manufacturers in general, that has meant a big change to how ladders are designed, how they're manufactured, how they're put in the market. And we're still going through that change at the moment. Apart from the change to the standard, the other things that we're anticipating is that we can harness technology. We can harness technology to try and provide some improvements to how ladders are used, and basically to provide a better way of managing the risk of using ladders. What we would like to do, and what the direction we're going in, is to provide a mobile app that would allow you to basically, when you use your ladder, step back from it and complete a checklist that demonstrates that you've thought of all the things and you put into place all the things you need to do, and take a photo of it, and that then is your evidence that that's how I set up the ladder, and it was okay when I first started on it, and you then have a permanent record of that.
Yeah, great. I kind of, the hardest thing probably is just to get through the white van man, a couple of lads with them. Why should they care that their lads are trained? Ultimately, what would you say to them to try and change that, backwards mindset?
It's a very difficult sell, to be honest with you, although it shouldn't be, but it is a difficult sell. As we said before, it just seems so easy that you pick up a ladder and you lean it against the wall and you go and do what you've got to do. But to put it in simple terms, although it is the most simple means of working at height, the fact of the matter is that in comparison to other work at height methods, it has the least protection. Right? In terms of the hierarchy of measures in relation to working at height, the ladder and the use of ladder is way down the bottom. And the reason it's way down the bottom is because unless you put in other means to prevent the fall or protect from the distance and consequences, when you're on a ladder, if you fall, you're gone. Yep. The work at height regulations then essentially says, look, if there's no other way that you can prevent a fall using preventative measures or protect from distance and consequences, the only option you've got is training and supervision.
Yep.
So from the point of view of anybody using ladders, you need to make sure that you know what you're doing. You need to make sure all of the things that will make sure that you're using that ladder for low risk and short duration activities, that you're using it properly, that you've angled it properly, that you've got it set up on a proper surface and it's leaning against a proper surface. All these things that to us would seem obvious. But I mean, even saying that as well, excuse me, I have some of my colleagues say to me, do you know what, Peter, we train people and we tell them how to do things safely and they choose not to do it. And that's how these accidents happen. I don't accept that. I contend that's not the case at all. The simple fact of the matter, in my opinion, is yes, you can train them, you can tell them what they should be doing, but lots of times they don't think about it or they don't know about it.
Yeah.
Our training scheme is intended to make sure that they do know about it, that they know the risks, and that they basically avoid those risks and make sure that they come back down again safely.
Yeah. So, like, if that message is rightly, pushed through to the right people, white van, small businesses, how accessible is this training then? From the likes of HSS.
Okay, the training is accessible throughout the country. In fact, throughout the UK and further afield. We have a system whereby we look at things holistically. The equipment needs to be correct. It needs to be to the correct standard. The instructors need to be competent, and we have a means whereby we train them, we assess them, and ensure they're competent. Training centre has to have the proper facilities, and all of the training centres use training content which is provided by the Ladder Association, and so that we have a consistent delivery of that at every training centre. There are something in the order of, I think, about 80 training centres in the UK, maybe even be more than that. I'm mid to check that. We're certainly there or thereabouts. And those training centres are running courses all day, every day. Yeah,
good. What would you say, I think the biggest thing with small businesses is that it's loss of work hours, isn't it? Like training. So ultimately the message is fairly clear, the consequences are great, but, what would you say, what's to one man who, number of lads on the job, and he doesn't want to do it, or she doesn't want to do it because of loss of time, convince them otherwise.
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is that we can't force you to do it. Right? If you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. We would strongly advise you to do it, and me, you're interested in it. And certainly the work height regulations requires you to do it. It requires you to make sure that everybody that's working at height is competent. But I suppose what I would also say then is we would strongly recommend that you undertake training, because it's going to protect you and it's going to protect your workforce. In the absence of that, and if you really cannot get to it, there is lots of free information available to you from the Ladder Association and the Ladder Association website. Admittedly, when you read that free information, it's probably going to point you to training in any case. On the Ladder Association website, you will find the simplified guidance, which was formerly HSE Simplified Guidance, INDG 455. It's been updated and reviewed, and is jointly badged by Ladder Association and HSE and that will tell you everything you need to know about using ladders and step ladders safely, but it will not replace training. It will not replace training and lead to that competence that is a requirement. And really what we want to avoid, and we want you to avoid, is that any of your workforce and any of your people go up there thinking that they're going to go out to work and they end up that they don't come back home to their wife and family and partners and children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because like the big businesses, they're training people to, if they see something they don't like, they're then empowered to say so, to stop people doing any sort of work. That just doesn't happen on a smaller site, does it? At the end of the day. So it's really important that hopefully that message comes across.
As you say, there are definitely there are economic factors in it for smaller contractors, especially self-employed contractors. And in fact, the statistics bear that out as well. The number of self-employed people who are subject to injury and fatalities is disproportionately high. Yeah.
I think it'd be nice to talk about for a minute these sort of, you've got several training partners, and someone like HSS Training who has a large proportion of that marketplace, how you help deliver quality across the board in terms of how they're delivering the training.
Okay. So first of all, the content of the training courses, and that is subject to review and a regular review by our training committee, and that training committee comprises of professional training organisations, manufacturers, representatives, and basically the whole panoply of stakeholders who are involved in the industry. As well as undertaking that regular review of the content, there is an ongoing assessment and audit of not only the training centres and how they're delivering that training, but of the instructors themselves. And they're subject to requirements for CPD as well to keep them up to speed. So again, as we said before, we do tend to look at things holistically. It's not just the equipment that we're concerned about, it's that the instructors are competent, that they continue to maintain their competence, that the training centres are to a standard, as well as the content being regularly reviewed and updated. And that is something that we're doing on a day-to-day constant basis.
Yeah, perfect. Good. So I'd like to know if there's a synergy between what you're doing for the other organisations you work within, PASMA, Ladder Association. Mm-hmm. Do you see them, as one and you work together, or very individual?
So a couple of things I'll say on that. The first thing is that I have always said, and we have always said within our organisations, that we are very happy to, and in actual fact, encourage working with and collaboration with other organisations where there is a synergy, and synergy is the exact term that we use. And that synergy generally relates to, if we're in the work rate sector, then there's a synergy immediately. And if the model that the association applies is similar to and has the same values as the PASMA and other organisations that we manage, then that works for us. That is exactly the case for Ladder Association. The values, the business model, and the fact that in the work rate sector all chimes really quite neatly with that requirement for synergy between the organisation for us to work together.
Yeah, fantastic. So how do you feel like in terms of the industry and as a whole then? I guess that, the purity of what the ladder is in terms of product, and a device to do work, is it an industry that you can change quickly, or is it you have to sort of plan and be, robust in terms of wanting to make change?
I can say to you that, but it's probably not any worse than any other sector. Things don't happen quickly. We cannot make things happen quickly. It's one of those things about trade associations and industry bodies. We need to carry everyone along with us. And that means that we need to take the time to discuss, to consult, and to convince our members that this is the direction of travel that we should take. It has been quite a change for what was formerly the British Ladder Manufacturers Association to move towards where we are now. The British Ladder Manufacturers Association, I think as I mentioned before, was primarily manufacturers. It is now a much wider church than that now. Initially there would be, less than 24 members. They're now up to 80 members, and that covers a whole spectrum of stakeholders from manufacturers, suppliers, training organisations, and other affiliate associates, sort of freelance instructors.
Good. What's the simplest message that you can give to people out there around ladder safety, do you think?
I think I've covered it previously. In the past, our message has been ladders are not banned. We've changed that messaging. We've changed it over the years to the message that we're at now, which is that ladders may well be the most suitable means of undertaking the activity, the work at height activity, but it shouldn't automatically be your first choice. If it's right to use a ladder, select the right ladder and get trained to use it safely. That's the main message.
Good. Thank you very much. So, within the work that you do within the Ladder Association, do you do outreach projects, trying to capture data, do research? How does that help your learning and your development within the organisation?
We have been, particularly the last couple of years, we have been undertaking quite a bit of market surveillance activity, and that's been in combination with and in partnership with our colleagues in Trading Standards and the Office of Product Safety and Standards. And that related particularly to a few years ago, there were some issues related to particularly telescopic ladders. And these telescopic ladders are very popular, used quite extensively. They're covered by a European standard, EN 131 Part 6. And it was reported to us and by a couple of Trading Standards departments that they had encountered some problems with them. We have latterly got involved in the last couple of years via the Test and Research Centre. Test and Research Centre is a UCAS accredited centre based in Soham in Cambridgeshire, which is jointly funded by Ladder Association and PASMA to undertake test certification and research activities. And we've had some market surveillance activities ongoing with Test and Research Centre and the other partner organisations, as I say, particularly at telescopic ladders. We produced a few reports, and those reports really are frightening reading. Working at height is dangerous enough without not being able to rely upon the equipment. And to be honest with you, the tests that we've undertaken in respect of the telescopic ladders initially really was quite frightening. Those telescopic ladders, primarily imported and generally from the Far East, fail catastrophically. And as I say, if you go on our website, on the Ladder Association website, you can see some videos of that, as well as the reports themselves.
Okay, yep.
That highlight just how badly these products failed. That has resulted in, from our point of view and from Trading Standards and OPSS point of view, that we have removed quite a few of those ladders from the market. They've been withdrawn and have been stopped at port. We've then directed our attention last year to multi-purpose ladders. That's those multi-purpose, multi-hinge ladders that go in all sorts of different directions and all that sort of thing. And we have selected those primarily, but not only, but primarily from online platforms. And again, sadly, unfortunately, pretty much all of those failed abysmally too when we took a testing on them. Right. Same story with that as well. Like, work at height is dangerous enough without not being able to rely on the equipment.
Yeah. I guess that's quite an empowering situation to draw a hard line on some of these products and have a direct impact. No, they're just not having these in the marketplace. Yep. How does that feel to have such a sort of big impact then? Do you know,
I would like to say we had a great and big impact, but it's not nearly enough.
Yeah.
We are hopeful that situation will change. Mm-hmm. Biggest difficulty we have with that is that we, along with other sectors, can identify and stop Trading Standards and OPSS stop products at the border. But no sooner do we identify and stop them than that manufacturer will go around the corner, have a new name and a new address, and continue to import or continue to export. We're really quite hopeful that the product safety review, which was undertaken by OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, tail end of last year, is likely to introduce some really quite important powers that will make a difference to that. The main difference that we're striving for is that in the absence of being able to take action against the manufacturers who are far away in another country and outside our jurisdiction, what we're driving for is that the online platforms be held accountable, and the online platforms take responsibility for the products that are being sold and advertised on their platforms.
Those products got to stay up to standard.
Yep.
And I guess that impacts directly then, the kit that is supplied on training courses by HSS Training is up to standards.
It's a requirement of membership of the Ladder Association that you either manufacture or supply or use in your training courses only equipment that complies with the current standard.
Yeah.
And those current standards are published on the website from time to time at the Ladder Association.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much for that conversation. It's been great to sort of learn about all things PASMA and the Ladder Association, just understanding your, involvement in the working at height sector, sorry. It's been a pleasure to have you. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much for being a part of the conversation with HSS Training. And we really hope to see you again and hear more about the journeys to come.
Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully I'll see you again in the not too distant future.